The fluorescent lights in the Manhattan private hospital flickered softly, casting an almost sacred glow over the sterile corridor. Inside the luxury maternity ward, hushed whispers and the beeping of machines filled the air. Nurses exchanged nervous glances, their attention drawn to the corner suite, where chaos was about to unfold. Victoria Lancaster, billionaire heiress and CEO, reclined against pristine white pillows, her designer gown contrasting with the vulnerability of the moment. Her hair perfectly styled even after labor, framed eyes that burned with icy contempt. Cradled in the nurse's arms was her newborn daughter, tiny, innocent, and undeniably beautiful. But when the nurse gently leaned closer, Victoria's manicured fingers froze mid-air. Her eyes widened, the baby's features, the shape of her nose, the deep brown hue of her skin, the unmistakable gleam in her eyes. This was not a Lancaster baby. Not in Victoria's mind. The room stiffened as David Carter, the hospital janitor, stepped forward. His uniform smelled faintly of bleach and hard work, his hands calloused, his posture humble yet steady. But his gaze, fixed on the infant, betrayed a storm of emotions. "Victoria," he whispered, voice cracking but firm. "She has my eyes," the silence shattered. Gasps erupted from the nurses, one dropping a clipboard with a metallic clang. Victoria's expression twisted, fury and fear colliding on her face. "Don't you dare!" she spat, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. "This child is mine. A Lancaster. And you—" Her eyes darted to David, dripping venom. "You're nothing but the janitor who cleans my floors." David's lips trembled, but his resolve didn't. He stepped closer, his voice steady now, echoing in the sterile chamber. "No amount of money, no name, no empire can erase the truth, Victoria. She carries my blood. And you can't deny her forever." The infant stirred, tiny fists curling as though echoing her father's defiance. Victoria turned away, hiding the terror in her eyes. Her empire, her reputation, her carefully constructed image, it all trembled under the weight of a newborn's face. Outside the suite, whispers traveled down the corridor like wildfire. Nurses leaned in, patients peeked from behind curtains. The scandal was alive, pulsing, unstoppable. And as David locked eyes with the heiress who had spent months dismissing him, a quiet storm brewed, because the truth was now living, breathing, undeniable, and this was only the beginning. Long before the cries of a newborn shook the Lancaster name, two very different worlds were quietly colliding. On one side stood David Carter, a man invisible to most of Manhattan's elite. Every dawn he slipped into his navy blue janitor's uniform, laced up his scuffed work boots, and boarded the rattling subway from the Bronx. His knuckles were raw from scrubbing marble floors that would never reflect his name. His shoulders stooped from carrying trash bags heavier than his dreams. Yet beneath the weariness lived a quiet dignity. David never complained. He swept, mopped, and polished skyscraper hallways with the silent belief that hard work, someday, somehow, would mean something. But in those very same towers of glass and steel reigned Victoria Lancaster, a woman who had never known the weight of struggle. She was born into wealth so vast it dripped from her every movement. Chauffeurs waited at gilded doors. Stylists chased after her with diamond-studded gowns. Her penthouse windows stretched so high they seemed to scrape the clouds, while down below, millions like David hustled just to survive. Victoria's world was champagne toasts at midnight, charity galas where she posed for flashing cameras, and boardroom meetings where her word was law. Her surname was more than an identity. It was a weapon, a crown, a guarantee that no one dared to question her. To the world, she was brilliance wrapped in silk. But to those who worked beneath her, especially David, she was arrogance carved into human form. Every evening, when the last executive left and the office lights dimmed, David's shift began. He would glide his mop across the polished floors of Lancaster Industries, his reflection staring back at him from the glass walls that separated him from her world. And sometimes late at night, when Victoria lingered in her office overlooking the glittering skyline, their paths crossed. She would glance up briefly, her jade green eyes sharp with disdain. as though the very sight of him trespassed on her air. To her, he was background noise, the shuffle of a mop, the faint smell of disinfectant. To her, he was nothing. But David noticed more than she realized. Behind the diamond necklaces and the icy glares, there were moments when her hands trembled, when her smile faltered. He saw a loneliness she tried desperately to hide. And maybe that was why fate, cruel and poetic, pulled them together in ways neither could control. Still, the lines were always drawn. The billionaire heiress perched atop her empire, and the janitor scrubbing her floors. One looked down, the other looked up. Both convinced they would never truly meet in the middle. And yet, destiny doesn't ask for permission. When whispers of scandal now shook the hospital walls, when a newborn's face reflected the truth, the contrast of their worlds became the story itself. The Bronx janitor who owned nothing, and the Manhattan heiress who owned everything, except the one thing she couldn't control. This wasn't just about a baby. It was about two worlds colliding, shattering, and exposing what happens when arrogance underestimates the quiet strength of the overlooked. And as the pieces of their past snapped into place, one thing became clear. Victoria Lancaster had started a war she thought she could win. But David Carter was no ordinary man. The aftermath of the hospital confrontation rippled through Manhattan like wildfire. Victoria Lancaster's fury had no bounds. Every fiber of her being screamed that this janitor, this man from the Bronx, could not possibly claim what was hers, her name, her legacy, her child. She called an emergency meeting in the 47th floor boardroom. The walls lined with floor-to-ceiling windows showing a glittering city that belonged to her, or so she thought. Private investigators, lawyers, and PR consultants gathered, sensing the storm about to erupt. "Find everything on him," Victoria barked, voice slicing through the quiet hum of the luxury office. "His debts, criminal records, even rumors if we must. We will erase him from Manhattan." Richard Thornton, her high-powered attorney, adjusted his tie and nodded. "We've started. References pulled. Background checks in motion. His work history has already been sabotaged." Victoria's lips curled into a venomous smile. "Perfect. Social media?" "We created fake profiles suggesting he harasses female bosses," Thornton continued, shoving a folder across the polished table. "Posts are spreading fast. By next week, no one will hire him." She leaned back in her leather chair, champagne in hand, convinced the victory was hers. He will learn that messing with a Lancaster has consequences. But David Carter, miles away in his modest Bronx apartment, remained unshaken. Cradling his newborn daughter, he had anticipated every move. While Victoria spent fortunes attempting to crush him, he had quietly documented her every action, every desperate attempt to protect her empire. His eyes, dark and determined, followed the city skyline as he murmured, "She thinks she can break me financially, socially. She doesn't realize I'm 3 steps ahead." The world saw a desperate janitor, but he was a strategist. Every insult, every smear, every lie hurled at him became ammunition. The same arrogance that Victoria wielded like a weapon was now her weakness. The tension escalated when Victoria, believing she had trapped him, attended a gala to celebrate her supposed triumph. Cameras flashed, influencers whispered, and the elite toasted to her cunning. But behind the smiles, she was unaware that David had already enlisted allies. Elena Rodriguez, a former NYPD detective, and a network of whistleblowers ready to expose the empire's darkest secrets. Back in the Bronx, David's calmness contrasted sharply with the chaos above. He reviewed recordings from months of clandestine meetings, late-night conversations, and sensitive confessions. Each piece of evidence, every unguarded word Victoria had spoken in confidence, added weight to the silent storm he was building. "She wants a war of resources," David said softly to Elena during a secure video call. "I'll give her a war of truths." Meanwhile, Victoria's minions continued their smear campaign. Gossip blogs, social media influencers, and even corporate contacts were bribed or manipulated into tarnishing David's reputation. He remained unseen, untouchable, collecting her missteps like a master strategist. And then, the first mini-twist, a leak. An anonymous tip to a journalist hinted at secrets buried deep within the Lancaster empire. Victoria's face paled as she read the message. Somewhere in the Bronx, a janitor, whom she had dismissed as inconsequential, was quietly turning her own arrogance into her undoing. In the penthouse, Victoria slammed a fist on the table. Impossible. He's nothing! How is he moving against me? Outside, the city moved unaware that a war had begun. Not just for power, but for justice, reputation, and the undeniable truth that no empire, no matter how golden, could hide from its own shadow. Because David Carter, the man she humiliated, was no longer invisible, and when the reckoning came, it would be swift, merciless, and irreversible. Victoria Lancaster was relentless. Every inch of her empire, her towering skyscraper, her network of lawyers, her carefully curated public image, became a weapon aimed squarely at David Carter. She refused to acknowledge that a man she deemed invisible could possibly challenge her. In the glass-walled war room atop Lancaster Industries, Victoria's army of private investigators and PR specialists pored over every scrap of David's life. They dug into his past, pulled up credit reports, and manufactured rumors that spread across social media. Fake profiles accused him of harassment, slander, and opportunism. Gossip blogs ran headlines questioning his character, painting him as a manipulative predator preying on wealthy women. He will never be one of us, Victoria spat, raising her voice as champagne glasses clinked around her. He will learn the price of crossing a Lancaster. Outside, Manhattan's elite whispered among themselves, enthralled by the scandal. Cameras snapped, influencers shared posts, and the story spread like wildfire. The world saw a desperate janitor, a man trying to extort a billionaire heiress. What they didn't see was the truth, that David had already prepared for every move, anticipating her rage, her lies, and her arrogance. Miles away in the Bronx, David cradled his daughter, Anthony, her jade-green eyes wide with curiosity. He smiled faintly, observing how her tiny hands curled around his finger. "She thinks she can destroy me socially and financially," he murmured to Elena Rodriguez, his ally and former NYPD detective. "But what she doesn't know is I'm 3 steps ahead." Elena nodded, her face tight with focus. "Every move she makes is being recorded. Every lie, every bribe, every smear campaign. We have it all." David had spent months gathering evidence, secretly recorded conversations, video messages, photos, financial documents, proof of bribery, corruption, and deliberate attempts to sabotage those who crossed Victoria. Her empire, built on fear and deception, had cracks that only he could expose. Meanwhile, Victoria doubled down. She held gala dinners, staged interviews with national news outlets, and presented herself as the victim of a manipulative janitor trying to destroy her reputation. Her perfectly timed tears and poised words fooled most of the public. "David Carter is a predator," she declared on live television, voice trembling with a practiced fragility. "He is trying to destroy my family, my company, and my life." Yet for every lie she published, David had a countermeasure ready. Elena methodically organized the evidence, encrypting files, cross-referencing confessions, and preparing the ultimate dossier. Every smear, every bribe, and every attempt to manipulate public perception became another piece of ammunition in his hands. The tension escalated when Victoria, convinced she had cornered him, attempted to hack his private files. She hired the most expensive digital security experts Manhattan could offer, confident that no janitor could outsmart them. But David had anticipated this. The servers housing his evidence were encrypted with military-grade protection, beyond even the reach of top-tier corporate hackers. Every attempt to infiltrate his data triggered backups and alerts, ensuring nothing was lost. Victoria's fury boiled. "Impossible. He's just a janitor," she screamed to Richard Thornton, her lawyer. "How is he moving against me?" Richard swallowed nervously. "Ma'am, he has planned for every move. Every smear you've attempted has already been documented." David, calm as ever, continued building his case. He carefully mapped her political contacts, bribery schemes, and attempts to silence journalists. Each secret deal she thought would remain hidden was catalogued with precision. In the quiet Bronx apartment, he watched Anthony sleep, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She's so focused on crushing me, he said softly, that she doesn't see the trap she's walking into. And when it unfolds, the world will see the truth. And Victoria? She celebrated every perceived victory, unaware that each move only strengthened the arsenal David held. The higher she rose in arrogance, the deeper she fell into the trap she didn't even know existed. Because what Victoria Lancaster didn't realize was that the invisible man she mocked had become the master of the chessboard, controlling every piece without anyone noticing. And when the revelation finally struck Manhattan, no one would be able to look away. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of Manhattan, igniting the skyline like molten gold. On the 47th floor of Lancaster Industries, Victoria Lancaster poured champagne, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She believed she had orchestrated the perfect victory. David Carter was socially ruined, financially cornered, and publicly humiliated. Every media outlet, every social influencer, every gossip blog painted him as a desperate opportunist. Her empire seemed untouchable. Outside, 3 black SUVs rolled silently to a halt. Elena Rodriguez stepped out of the first, carrying a briefcase that seemed ordinary but contained years of secrets that could topple kings. From the second vehicle, 2 FBI agents emerged, suits pressed, badges gleaming. From the third, investigative journalists from the New York Times descended, cameras poised and notebooks ready. Inside, Victoria raised her glass to Thornton. By the end of the week, he'll be begging for scraps. This man will never rise again, the elevator chimed. Security monitors flickered. And then the first knock on the suite door shattered her confidence. "Miss Lancaster," the security director stammered, "we have a situation." Victoria's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she demanded, "What kind of situation?" "The FBI, ma'am. They're requesting access to all company servers, your personal files. And there's an arrest warrant in your name." The world seemed to tilt. Victoria's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Impossible," she whispered almost to herself. I am untouchable." But the door burst open. Special Agent Martinez stepped in, badge flashing. "Victoria Lancaster, you are under arrest for bribery of federal officials, document forgery, conspiracy to commit murder, and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent." The room went silent except for the soft crackle of the handcuffs locking around her wrists. Victoria's blood ran cold. Every contact, every bribe, every plan she had meticulously orchestrated crumbled in an instant. Meanwhile, in a modest Bronx apartment, David Carter watched the live feed on his encrypted tablet. Anthony, now 10 months old, clutched a block in his tiny hands, eyes sparkling jade. David's lips curved into a faint smile. "The same walls you built are now your prison," he murmured. Every desperate move Victoria had made, the bribes, the threats, the smear campaigns, had been catalogued, backed up, and strategically handed over to the authorities. Every word she had whispered in confidence, every confession she had made to David, was now evidence. Richard Thornton, realizing his own safety was at risk, handed over additional documents to the FBI in exchange for immunity. Victoria, once untouchable, now faced federal charges with no leverage left. Outside the skyscraper, chaos unfolded. Journalists swarmed, cameras captured every moment, and social media erupted with real-time updates. The story went viral instantly. The billionaire heiress who had tried to destroy an invisible janitor was now herself facing justice. Back in the suite, Victoria's gaze met David's, broadcasted live to the world. Her face was a mixture of disbelief, fear, and raw anger. You destroyed everything," she shouted. David's voice, calm and resolute, carried across the feeds. "I didn't destroy anything, you did. You just documented it for the world to see." And in that instant, Manhattan watched as the untouchable heiress was led away, her empire dismantled before her eyes. Luxury offices emptied, properties were frozen, accounts blocked. The city that had revered her now whispered in shock. Meanwhile, David stepped outside with Anthony in his arms, the baby's eyes sparkling like emeralds. Reporters and onlookers captured the scene, a striking contrast. A man once invisible now commanding respect, walking freely under the sunlight, holding the future he had fought for. Victoria's private jets, designer gowns, and priceless jewelry could not buy what David now possessed: dignity, justice, and undeniable truth. In prison, she shared a cell with women who showed no reverence for her former status, forced to confront the consequences of every act of arrogance and cruelty. David watched from a distance as the woman who had underestimated him faced the collapse she had ignored for years. Anthony cooed in his arms, completely oblivious to the spectacle. "She had a choice," David said softly, voice filled with quiet triumph. "She chose pride over love. Now the world will see exactly who she really is." And as the news spread globally, viral headlines proclaimed, "Billionaire heiress falls, the janitor who exposed Manhattan's darkest secrets." The twist was poetic. The man she had dismissed, humiliated, and underestimated had not only survived, but risen. The child she had denied, Anthony, would grow knowing his father's courage, integrity, and strategic brilliance. For Manhattan, the story was more than scandal. It was a lesson. No empire, no fortune, no social status could outrun truth. And for David Carter, the invisible janitor, it was vindication, justice, and the beginning of a legacy that money alone could never buy. 6 months had passed since Manhattan witnessed the downfall of Victoria Lancaster. The once feared billionaire heiress now languished behind the cold steel bars of federal prison, stripped of fortune, influence, and pride. Her empire, a sprawling network of greed and deception, had been dismantled, leaving only echoes of the arrogance that once ruled the city. Meanwhile, David Carter thrived. The man who had been dismissed as an invisible janitor had transformed the evidence, courage, and patience of years into a legacy. Santos and Associates Security Consulting, the company he founded using his unparalleled expertise in corporate fraud detection and security, had acquired several of Lancaster Industries' buildings at a fraction of their original cost. David's name, once unknown outside the Bronx, now carried respect across Manhattan's corporate corridors. Anthony, now nearly a year old, explored his new office environment. Tiny fingers brushing the polished desks that had once belonged to his mother's empire. His jade-green eyes sparkled with curiosity and innocence, a living testament to the truth his mother had denied. Each smile and laugh from Anthony served as a reminder to David that his patience and vigilance had not only preserved his dignity, but built a foundation of hope and justice for his son. David's daily life had shifted from survival to influence. Companies clamored for his consultancy services. Journalists sought his insights on corporate ethics. And families, communities, and employees affected by prior corporate malfeasance recognized his name as a beacon of integrity. While Victoria had attempted to destroy him socially, financially and morally it was David's foresight, restraint, and intelligence that had turned every attack into an opportunity. In prison, Victoria faced the harsh realities of her arrogance. The luxury she once commanded, the high-end clothes, the designer shoes, the private jets, was replaced with standard-issue uniforms, shared cells, and the slow grinding routine of labor for pennies an hour. The public, once mesmerized by her power, now read headlines about her crimes, convictions, and the communities she had harmed. One morning, she received a visitor request. Expecting a journalist or an official, Victoria was shocked to see David holding Anthony. "Why are you here?" she whispered, voice trembling, a rare hint of vulnerability breaking through her arrogance. "So Anthony can see where his birth mother is," David said calmly. "One day, when he asks why you weren't part of his life, I want to be able to answer honestly." Victoria's eyes filled with regret. But David's steady gaze made it clear. This was not about revenge. It was about truth, justice, and the life he had chosen to build. Anthony, oblivious to the tension, smiled up at both adults, his jade eyes glinting with innocence and promise. Outside the prison walls, Manhattan's corporate landscape had shifted. The old networks of deceit had crumbled. Former allies of Victoria either faced investigations or had realigned themselves with integrity. David's influence grew not through fear, but through respect. His journey had inspired those who had felt powerless, proving that humility, strategy, and truth could overcome arrogance, wealth, and social standing. The moral of the story was clear. Arrogance destroys, humility builds. Manipulation backfires, patience rewards. David's patience, foresight, and ethical choices ensured that justice prevailed, and that the man once invisible had become a symbol of hope and power rooted in integrity. As Anthony played with colored blocks in the office he now called home, David looked at the skyline, reflecting on the journey. "The woman who underestimated me," he said softly, "thought she controlled the world. But the truth always finds its way." And now, it was time for the audience to reflect. Have you ever been underestimated? Ever felt invisible when others tried to define your limits? Remember this story. Let it remind you that patience, strategy, and truth are the greatest powers of all, and that sometimes those who seem powerless are quietly building the most unstoppable force.